I can't review this board game. I just can't give it an in-depth review. I just can't. It's too crazy. Hegemony is a huge rising game on BGG, with good reason. It's a game about IRL society with everyone playing different classes. And yes, this is actually class warfare, the game. As such, this is an inherently sensitive topic we're talking about. I mean, even the word hegemony is a pretty loaded one. I'm not taking any ideological stance here or whatever, I'm just reporting on what the game is. This is not a review. I better not be seeing any comments down below saying whether or not this is a good or bad review, because it's not really one. We're not really going in depth about the pros or cons or balance or whatever, so you can call this a overview, a impressions video after 2 plays, or a rant, etc., but don't call it a review in the way we do it here at Shelfside. Also, our 2 plays were at 4 players, so we're only talking about the 4-player game, which is using all the factions, which truly I don't think is enough to scratch the surface of this crazy game. This video is brought to you by Ascension.gg. This is a private free-to-play World of Warcraft server so you can play for the Horde. It revolves around being classless, where you can pick your own unique hero by combining abilities from all classes. I gave it a quick run and it was a fun mix of nostalgia with some added quality of life stuff. Like, the game feels so much faster with the draft builds, where you can just learn preset ability builds to combo together. I used the Wind Berserker in the starting area and it was so fast, and you can go even faster with the leveling draft builds. The new season also has tons of new modes, including the wildcard mode. And when we tried it out, it was super busy. It's where you get random abilities as you level, and you can roll a loadout right when you start, and you can re-roll it. Once you've rolled your initial build, you can refine it by playing through the endgame and prestiging. That is basically infinite replayability. So check out the link in the description below to play Ascension WoW, Destiny's Dawn for the new season. Now, back to the video. Remember, it's not a review, it's a video. Hegemony! What is it? The board game, that is. In Hegemony, you're one of the 4 factions of classes in modern day society. You're trying to get the most points, aka prosperity, in your own different way. Regardless of faction, each round will have you taking turns of playing 1 card from your hand, using its ability, or discarding it to do a faction action. Then you get a free action. Everyone gets 5 of these turns involving a card from your hand, then the round ends. Then you do upkeep, like possibly feeding your workers and paying taxes. Yes, paying taxes, I'm not making this up. However, the similarities between the factions ends there, so let's get into how unique each of them are. And as we get into this, I'm not making any of this stuff up, okay? This is how crazy IRL the game is. To start, we have the state, which is trying to gain the most legitimacy via dealing with each of the factions, like providing healthcare and then trying to match the policies to each round's randomly drawn political agenda. You may have to push these to the left or right. Yes, very thematic. Then there's the capitalist, trying to get the most capital every round. That is, cash money after it gets taxed. This lot mostly gets money by producing goods via their businesses and selling them to other players or exporting them to the international market. But wait, someone's actually got to work at those businesses, so then we have the working class. They are playing a worker placement-ish game by deciding which of the businesses to work at. The state, capitalist ones, or the middle class ones. The working class gets their money via wages through working. For them to win, they are trying to do well for their people, mostly by gaining healthcare from buying it from other players that have it produced. Finally, there's that middle class, which is also playing a worker placement-ish game, kind of like the working class. Difference is, they just have less workers that tend to be more skilled, meaning the non-gray ones. Oh yeah, and then they also have their own businesses, meaning they can work for themselves or anyone else. They're kind of like the working class and capitalist combined, where they have the means of production and our labor as well. So they can produce stuff, but to fulfill all their needs, including healthcare to get their points, they may need to buy it from other players. Now that you know all 4 factions, remember that everyone has their own goals, of which other factions can either help you or hurt you. Like the capitalists can sell cheap healthcare to the working class, but they can also provide the most expensive healthcare by jacking up prices. Price too high? Well then go to the middle class for healthcare. Or with a certain government policy, state healthcare is free. Oh, by the way, this buying stuff from others is usually via a main action. You usually have to discard a card, but sometimes you can use the ability on the card instead for something similar to the trade action. Now for voting, which we didn't mention yet, if someone wants to propose a bill as an action, a vote happens for it at the end of the round. Everyone first says whether they are for or against it, then you take out 5 cubes from the bag, then make 2 piles, those for the for voters and those for the against voters. Lastly, everyone can secretly spend a resource they have called influence, and that contributes to the final result. If there's a tie, those in favor win. That's a round. At the end of the 5th round, you see who has the most points. Oh, and everyone except for the state gets bonus points by having more of their political trackers in their column. So try to get it aligned to you. Notable cool stuff, not pros. Now for all the cool stuff that was tugging at me to make this video. That again is not a review. Like, for instance, I'm not even going to talk about components much in this video. Moving on, as we discussed, each of these factions is insanely unique and thematic. Like, if you want asymmetry in a game, this game has got you covered. From a physical point of view, there's completely different player boards, pieces, and part of the board they each interact with. And decks are slightly different with a little bit of crossover. Each faction has different ways of winning. So let's start with the working class and middle class, who are the most similar since they both have workers. But the working class will get so many workers, definitely a lot of unskilled ones every round, and they have immigration to deal with on top of that. Yes, that is literally a thing in this game that affects all laborers. As such, the working class really needs to find ways to feed all of its workers. Be careful for rampant unemployment. But also, since they have the most workers, they can have some leverage on the game, and we'll get into that more. Then the middle class is a little less extreme, but has to worry about their own businesses, where they get to set wages, choose to open some that might have openings for the working class to work at, or sell those that no one can work in. So both of these laboring classes are playing a working placement-ish game where while their workers don't come back to them every round, they can decide to move them from business to business as an action. Let's say a new doctor's office opens up you want to work at? Well, let's move to work there. Middle class moves, and working class decides to move. Each of these workers corresponds to the right type of job. I'm assuming these ones are like media pros, and then the ones over here are some type of agricultural pro. You can even decide to trade the unskilled gray workers to these by just getting some education, which is a good in this game you can buy. Oh yeah, and then both these factions can protest for higher wages if they think their payday is too low. Let's go to the other extreme with the capitalist, who don't have any workers, but rather they're all about that money. Remember, money is VP for them at the end of a round. It just has to survive taxation first. So a big part of the capitalist is playing a money manipulation game to change your tax bracket. You can change the price of goods accordingly, sell or buy businesses, or screw it, let's just buy a private island for points. And these tycoons aren't directly beholden to labor complaints because they can automate their businesses. Automation exists as an investment in this game. The state is a much different story, where they're actually very reliant on what others do. And if you look at the state's actions here, it's the smallest range out of all of them. Essentially, the government is trying to be buddy-buddy with everyone in the game, all the factions, to try to move their legitimacy up, and then try to coax people in the right direction to get their events completed, and then see where people are leaning politically so they can move these trackers up and down to do their political agenda. But, the state money is vastly different from everyone else. Not just because it's in the middle of the board, but if the state goes broke, okay, like everyone else, the government gets a loan, but if they do that twice, at the end of the round, the IMF, aka the International Monetary Fund, will come in and say, "What the heck are you doing to the country? This is inhumane, how could you?" So yeah, since the state is the equivalent of too big to fail, they are relieved of their debts. But then the IMF changes all political policies to what they want. Uh-oh. This could even mean liquidating public businesses. Oh yeah, the state also loses half of their legitimacy bonus with every player, which hurts their VP advancement. Okay, so that's the big catch of Hegemony, right? Each faction is extremely thematic and asymmetric. But now we'll get into how they all interact with one another in very thematic ways. Cause the state and working class are butt buddies, as the working class wants the state to get bigger to provide them with free healthcare, and sometimes more places to work at. Then as the state provides such healthcare to the masses, they get super legit. The capitalists get crazy returns on goods being produced and sold to other players if they don't want to sell to the foreign market. They can get even more goods via access to imports, but they'll be paying the government a little bit because there's a tariff on that. Oh, and then you can vote for the tariff to go up or down. Also, anytime the capitalists want more things, someone has to make that, so they're beholden to the laboring players continuing to work at their businesses. The boss man can't be too stingy with salaries. The middle class is in the name. That is, straddling the middle. They don't want things to be too crazy to the left and right of the political tracks. They're balancing deciding to work for the state or capitalists to get wages, or should they just work for themselves to get their production? Does the working class have too much unemployment and you can give them some jobs? Maybe the state can pay for your businesses. Oh yeah, we gotta dial in on the state going broke, which is a huge deal in this game. Remember how we said this resets the political policies through the IMF coming in? Well, remember, these political policies are the perpetual passives of the game, so that is massively disrupting plans. Like, did you want to vote on something at the end of the round? Well, too bad. Your proposed bill is now thrown out by the IMF. You can't vote this round anymore. Whatever the IMF decided for you, that's going to be it this round. Were you reliant on getting a bunch of cash from state jobs? Well, actually, these state businesses are now gone because the state can't afford them anymore. So all these people here are laid off. If you're expecting to get wages here, too bad. Were you happy about low taxes over here? Well, now taxes are at the highest tier. So you gotta pay through your nose at the end of the round. Pay a bunch of taxes to the government who needs the money. So treasury going to zero, big deal. And there's so many ways for other players to manipulate the state's money to avoid that or get to that. If you want to drain the treasury, every faction has a way to call in government favors for them to pay for stuff. Or just vote for high minimum wage, then go work for the state in droves because the state has to pay those wages. Or they can vote to open up a ton of state businesses and then the state has to pay for each of those when they open. Easy way for the state to go massively broke. If you're trying to protect the state treasury, you do the opposite. Vote to shrink the government by closing businesses or only buy your goods from the state. Nothing wrong with public education. Or vote to raise taxes or keep them high. Essentially, hegemony is super interlinked play among all these different parts of society, all these different classes, where you're trying to get the best for your class while trying to squeeze out the most out of every other class. Don't squeeze the government too much because then they go broke and then that can disrupt plans, but then maybe you want them to go broke to reset the IMF. Every turn can be decisions on what goods to prioritize making, so maybe you make or close businesses, maybe you're pricing each of the 3 goods differently, maybe you're deciding how to move your workers if you have workers, and then of course you're always worrying about this policy track. There's even more stuff we could talk about these policies, and just to summarize what they are, these are how big the government is, minimum wage, taxation, cost of public healthcare, and cost of public education. But we also got these 2 on the side we have to worry about. Immigration is laborers coming to the country every round, which can hurt or help the working and middle class, depending on how many more people they're okay with having. More people can be more problems. Then you can even affect foreign trade policy, which really affects those exporting goods, that is, the capitalists. Anyways, between these 7 policies, you're always looking when's the right time to push it towards your desired area. If you're not the state, you want to see maybe you have the state's support with their agenda this round. And then it really helps that the middle class is always trying to have stuff in the middle, so you can count on them if one of these are on the extremes. Pretty much everyone is involved with the vote because the end product will affect them in some way. After sussing out how much or how little each player wants the policy pushed in their preferred direction, you have to see if you have enough voting cubes in the bag. More is better. Then you might want to acquire more influence via radio stations or straight up state corruption. Haha. You want to get those purple cubes for more value after you see results. And we glanced over briefly in the initial overview, but all non-state players get endgame bonuses for having the marker on their preferred alignment. So come mid to late game, you're frequently looking at what policy you can slowly move over to your side or keep it there, which again can get really disrupted if the IMF comes in. Oh no. All of these cool things I'm bringing up just culminates into a believable feeling country with a massive capacity for tons of banter and thematic stories. Examples, let's go. Our first game had so much unemployment via unchecked immigration, where workers were sitting at the docks in droves and could not find a job. And then there was so much healthcare that needed to be provided for them. But then there was a lot of representation in voting because lots of people. The second game had the working class being insanely self-sufficient by getting their own farms early game. So then the capitalist couldn't get them to work for his farms. In both games, the working and middle class are yelling at each other about why they're taking each other's jobs. Actually, in one game, the middle class and capitalists were actively trying to bankrupt the state to close down jobs for the working class, who were massively winning. Then at the corner every game, the capitalists will complain about taxes and try to pay the least amount possible. And then the citizens don't appreciate their food, they're gonna export all the food they create overseas to North Korea or something. Imagine game states where people are not really wanting to work for the capitalist companies, but they're still working there, so the capitalists enforce an extra shift to squeeze out labor now. Then when those workers leave, no worries, just sell the business. And then having less businesses helps you evade some taxation. Or the middle class just leaves the country, they migrate out because conditions are just so bad. The country isn't what they thought it'd be. After the IMF came in like the second time this year. The last super cool thing is that it's clear the replayability in this game is quite high. Granted, there's not a huge variance in initial openings as your government policies, starting quantity of laborers, and money are always the same. But as you draw cards from your deck and interact with others, a lot of different things can happen. There's a lot of decision space. Again, we've only played the game twice, and I've only tried 2 factions, and in those first games, it's like you're only scratching the surface if you truly want to get good. Ideally, you'd want to have a very good idea of everyone's deck. Then it can take some degree of comfort to take actions that are outside the more common ones, like protesting, selling companies, buying storage, and then getting political cubes. Concerns! Now these aren't cons because I haven't done a deep dive into this game. If I would, if we're making a review, remember this video is not a review. Anyways, the owner of this game has reported to me that the rulebook sucks. And I read through it and yeah, I can confirm a lot of his misgivings. For one, there's 0 table of contents, so jumping around to topics is pretty frustrating. Like, how did they forget to put this in? Oh, wait, it's at the end of the digital rulebook. Nice, you snuck that in at the end. There's also a huge lack of labeling sections properly. Like, it'd say, go to IMF intervenes for more information. Okay, where the heck is that? Oh, it's under the section that says additional rules, so why not give us a page number at least? Hegemony's rulebook is just unfortunately much below average when it comes to presenting info. If you say, carry out elections, show the political tracker. When you say refilling the bag, show the cubes going in. It's just gonna be rough learning Hegemony from scratch. If we compare it to another heavily asymmetric game we've reviewed, Root, that has all the central rules first, then all the factions. Then if you really need to know more, there's a law of Root to reference. Hegemony just has the faction explanation smack in the middle. All the faction explanation, everything in the middle of the rulebook, which is so bizarre because when you're reading it, you don't even know all the rules yet. By its very nature, Hegemony is just going to be an inaccessible game with even more asymmetry in the Root and more components and a longer playtime. So why not just give us more stuff to help? Something other than just this rulebook, like a how to play to get people started. That gets me to the player aids, which everyone gets one of, which is a huge square box filled with text. You see how the player aids look real wordy? Well, that's because they're literally just sections of the rulebook copy and pasted with some parts cut out. How lazy is this? This combined with the smaller aid is weirdly redundant. Since they're a little bit redundant, you'd think you'd mostly use a small one as a quick reference, but it actually doesn't go over the beginning and ending of each round, so you have to default to the bigger one that has everything except for more in-depth info on scoring and taxation, which are super crucial. Basically, you're playing this hunting and flipping game. And if there's gonna be so many pamphlets, you'd expect something explaining the other factions, right? Nope, not at all here. But at least we do have a nice IMF intervention sheet. My last concern, again, not a con, is that the timing of cards drawn really matters in this game. They have so many different power levels. See these ones to the right that are super strong, and then replace them with these ones that are kind of unplayable. There's about 2 copies of each card in the game, with no way to draw more cards besides the end of your turn where you draw back up to 7, and then there's no way to tutor or search for cards in your deck, so what you draw is pretty much what you have to use. Let's get into some massive differences that we've seen happen. Say the working class is able to get their 2 farms really early. Well, they're gonna be really ahead because their greatest fear is feeding their workers. Wow, who would have thought that giving the working class their own business is really strong? They have no issue with filling the farms up, and would you look at that? The farm is also green, so they can use it to easily go towards the prerequisite of making a union, which gives them points every turn. As for the capitalists, getting offshore companies is crucial. And if you top deck it at the right turn, that's massive point generation as you move tons of money to capital. If you never draw it, that's pretty hard for getting points. Those who have much more experience in Hegemony have compiled this awesome spreadsheet that really shows how uneven the spread of strength of cards is. Cards can be stronger at certain rounds, there are some that are always weak, etc, etc. With this much interaction in the game we talked about, sure, there's some self-balancing that occurs, but I couldn't help thinking if there could have been some way to draw more cards or search for more cards, something a little bit more in depth with your cards. Whatever, this isn't really a review. Let's just move on to the recommendations. Now it's time for recommendations. No score out of 10. If you want that, I'll have my personal score coming up after this. Hegemony is so fascinating that I had to make a video on it despite not having enough time to actually review it. The theme itself is pretty much the X factor in implementation. It really is class warfare, where you need to keep updating what factions to be buddy-buddy with, while progressing in your own asymmetric way. And there's no shortage of cards that feel correct in their effects. However, while Hegemony is a long game, it's going to be at least 1 hour per player, so that's 4 hours for playing all 4 factions. It obviously doesn't cover everything about society. I mean, how could it, right? The class always seems to agree with what's going on. There's no internal class strife. And then yes, one class getting better doesn't necessarily mean that your class is getting hurt. But hey, in this simulation of a board game within a long game night, it does the job. Now for the actual gameplay, well, it having asymmetry front and center definitely has some consequences. It doesn't go deep into the worker placement because it's not really one. Hegemony doesn't have combos where you unleash your class as you tie together some slew of cards, or you have some massive uprising to destroy half the board. Nope, it's more of a steady progression of turns. And with that, it's not really a normal Euro or area control or even a normal negotiation game. Let's go back to the state, where their interdependence on everyone else for voting can be a bit jarring. They have the least amount to move around on the board, least amount of action range on their turn, and don't even have their own voting cubes to manage in the secret bag. Imagine this, you're victim to other players constantly spending your government money via cards, and you have to pass a bill to get more income via taxation or shrinking your businesses. If other players really want to bankrupt you, they can. Its reliance on others makes it possible to play like a snooze fest and accidentally win. It is possible. If you're more traditionally Euro-minded, this is the faction to stay away from. I kept thinking of this BGG review that the owner of our Hegemony copy showed me, where the reviewer played 150 plus hours of the game and ended with the take, the stories from Hegemony are much more fun than actually playing the game mechanics. And while, yes, that's very subjective, it goes to show that how much of the draw of this game is how the mechanics keep drawing parallels to IRL things, like the capitalists exporting goods because the residents want low prices, allegedly like Japan. And there's probably a bunch of degeneracy with the government state that is like modern day Greece, which is where the designers of this game are from. My owner friend tells me that he likes to roleplay when he plays this game. He claims the best mindset for it is like a very structured tabletop role-playing game, where you don't have that much control of anything besides your hand of cards, which is really swingy anyways. Just have the most fun ranting about unemployment crises, the taxes are too high again, or the government never pushes policies, we can never get a policy changed, or the middle class is being too much in the middle about things, etc, etc, etc. To quote this BGG article one more time, he says that one amazing thing about this game is that he believes it intentionally simulates the never-ending problems of society. And yes, Hegemony always provides conflict between classes because they're constantly opposed to one another, with some collaboration sprinkled throughout. Again, this isn't the most gamified thing, with there being literal tax multipliers to figure out how to pay our taxes every round. You know how some people complain that Euros are just as fun as doing your taxes? Well, Hegemony, 3 out of the 4 factions, you are literally paying your taxes every round for fun. All of these possibly alarming parts of the game are also why it's so beloved by its target group, those who want a heavy strategy game about each of their friends taking on a part of society and wheeling and dealing to get their way, while the theme serves as a very relatable backdrop for constant banter. Despite its heavy barriers to accessibility and that its completely IRL theme might be a little bit uneasy to play on game night, like maybe you don't like the feeling of workers getting laid off, it has its target crowd in love. Plenty of glowing reviews on BGG, and you can put yourself in that class's shoes and just complain about your faction getting the short end of the stick. Don't forget, Hegemony is long, and a big reason why I couldn't do a proper review on this part simulation, part Euro, part negotiation game is because I couldn't see the time limit actually going below 4 hours, even if we played it more. The more you know about each faction and how to counterplay others, and as you memorize each card in the game, the longer I think turns will actually take, and you're gonna have to be thinking about what cards someone else has to play on you. At 5 rounds with 20 actions around for 4 players, that's 100 total actions that need to happen, not including the voting. So yeah, 4+ hours. For those who gobble up the theme and can stomach the time, Hegemony could be one of your favorite games of all time, and well worth the $100 on Amazon right now, who is being played by the capitalist player. Haha, see what I did there. Remember this game of life? Forget that. This is actually a very IRL game of life. It's very thematic and educational. Even if the game is not fun to you, it could be funny. Maybe it's fun, but not funny. Maybe it's neither fun nor funny. And now my personal score can shed more light on this. My scoring. My personal score for Hegemony after playing the working class and capitalist class each once, so a total of 2 plays, is gonna be a 6 out of 10. It is above average. I think this game's learning curve is pretty uncomfortable for me. I don't like reading such a word-dense pamphlet, but halfway through the first game, everything just like clicked for me. The game is in fact fun. The theme is extremely novel, and the way it's implemented with your friend sitting across from you is very entertaining. I've had many a chuckle even just looking at the cards in the game. And the fact that me and Pranav are forever to be fated as enemies, as me as a capitalist and him as the working class is so memorable. The voting is really nuanced too, and I can see myself with a lot of room to grow in skill level as I can suss out people's intentions and make better voting proposals, because getting a VP from winning votes is satisfying. And the end of the game is a fun rush to get all the voting in your column, all while trying to rush your normal source of victory points. Hegemony just feels like a very crunchy game that repeatedly has me in the giggles as I stop to go like, yeah, that's how this faction feels like, IRL. I guess. But I do think this game's pacing is pretty off for me. It feels like the peak is at the end of round 3 or the middle of round 4, where people are frantically pushing towards their end goal as class warfare lines are truly drawn. But then the game keeps going. Luckily for me, I've played a lot of many other long board games, even longer board games, so I broke it down to a couple of reasons why it feels off. One is that there's actually not much going on the board during this game. The majority of progressed things are opening or closing businesses, and then moving these trackers left or right. Again, half the factions don't have workers, so the worker placement thing, or even if you even want to call it that, the worker movement isn't that interesting to me. So once I'm about 2 to 3 hours into this, I'm like, oh yeah, the board is pretty much the same. This goes hand in hand with how there's not really much progression or cool turns that stood out to me mechanically. Thematically, things are cool and funny, but there's rarely any big pivotal combo or build that makes me feel big-brained or impressed with the pacing. Next, I find that taking a turn to propose a bill just feels like a very uneasy action to me. Like, I suppose this would feel less bad the better I get at the game, but right now, spending a precious action for doing something that might have an outcome of 0 feels terrible, while I also have to worry about feeding my people or paying taxes. I got really tilted when the IMF came in and took my voting marker off because it resets this policy track. And then it's like, oh wow, one of my turns just went down the drain. This happened in each game. And again, if I get better at the game, maybe it won't feel as bad. The last pacing issue is that it feels like there's not much room for player expression. You're pretty much going towards your own faction's goal in its own logical way. And as such, there's not really cool novel plays I've seen in my head. Just better ways to play off each other and optimize. When I compare Hegemony to my other favorite game that takes an hour per person, so again, probably about 4+ hours, Sid Meier's Civilization 2010, it feels like there's always so much going on in the game for the time you invest into it. There's armies being raised and destroyed, cities granting extra actions, wonders blessing the world, all while tech is shooting everyone's capabilities up. It's an experience where there are climatic swings, turns are slightly unpredictable, and actions are massively expanding in decision space with more units and techs. Another game that came to mind is John Company 2nd Edition. Now this one was funny because I've played John Company twice and Hegemony twice, and after playing Hegemony, I was thinking, I actually might like this more than John Company. But after weeks and weeks of reflection, I actually think I'd rather play John Company. Even though John Company is a little bit too much into the political maneuvering side for me to be a favorite, where some turns feel like straight slogs if you're behind, I'm not really playing Hedge or Joko for their core mechanics. I'd rather play TI4 or Civ for that. Rather, I'm playing for these interactive stories with a competitive backbone. With John Company, I can see all the crazy plays happening, while India actually changes in front of you, with all the player expression and option space feeling huge. Now, this sounds like a lot of complaints, but I actually wouldn't be subjecting Hegemony to all this scrutiny if it wasn't so long. If it was 2 hours, heck, I'd play it again pretty easily and it'd be a 7 out of 10. Remember, the theme is that immersive. It's that interesting for me that if I can get it to the table, no problem, yeah, let's have a game night for it. As such, I actually think Hegemony is straddling two opposing thoughts for me, like the middle class in this game, if you will. On one end, it could have gone harder with the simulation and realism ideas by being a video game. And when I look at the components, the tax table you need to look at, and player a text, that would have been a much more replayable experience for me. Maybe the businesses feel like real businesses, make currency more nuanced, add more for the state to do, add a real map, etc., etc. On the other end, Hegemony could have kept a lot of these ideas it has, but just streamline it, possibly to 45 minutes a player instead of 60 by shaving off a round, or reducing some policies, or reducing some components. Is this physical streamlined version even possible? Is that what the designers want? I don't know. But Hegemony has this crowd. I'm glad to have covered it in this way, and I'm excited for more asymmetric games that are kind of tackling such nuance like this. Thanks for watching the video. That was Hegemony, not the review. It is a video. So yeah, I'm super glad I get that out for you guys. Again, we have so many reviews coming in. So for me to spend 8 to 12 more hours playing this to make a full review, yeah, I don't know if that's quite in the schedule for us. It's not part of our policy, if you will. Anyways, thank you to our patrons right here for making these videos like this possible. And again, thank you to our Mad Lads of Cardboard right over there. Okay, that is it. Hegemony, that's the video. I'll be reading you guys in the comments. I'm very interested to see what you guys have to say. Yeah, probably someone that's played the game more than me can probably provide some more input too. Okay, bye-bye. Yeah.